A picture-perfect family. A devoted wife, a loving husband, a bright young son. They were the couple everyone admired. Their home was filled with laughter, home-cooked meals, and memories that seemed to define the very meaning of happiness. But behind closed doors, something far more sinister was brewing. It started with whispers, late-night phone calls, stolen glances, unexplained absences. A betrayal that cut deeper than any knife. And on one fateful Thanksgiving, the perfect illusion shattered. By the time the guests arrived, the table was set, the feast was prepared, and the wine was flowing. But one person was missing. A husband. A father. A man who had sat at the head of that table year after year. What happened that night would leave an entire community reeling. A gruesome discovery. A horrifying truth that no one could have imagined. And a crime so unthinkable, it would haunt Thanksgiving tables for years to come. How does a marriage built on love and trust spiral into unspeakable violence? What happens when revenge is served as the main course? Before we dive into this chilling case, be sure to like this video and subscribe. Because trust me, you won't believe what happens next. The Wessons were the kind of family people envied. Not in the way that bred resentment, but in the way that made folks stop and admire, wishing for a glimpse of that same magic in their own lives. Jamilah and Kareem moved through the world with a grace that felt effortless, like they had cracked some secret code to happiness. Together, they were a force, respected, admired, and, in many ways, untouchable. Jamilah was known across Houston for her gift in the kitchen. A culinary instructor by profession, she had a way of turning the simplest ingredients into something unforgettable. Her peach cobbler melted in your mouth, her oxtails fell right off the bone, and her mac and cheese had people fighting for the last scoop. Cooking wasn't just a job for her, it was a love language, a way of bringing people together. Her students adored her, not just for her skills, but for her warmth. She treated everyone like family, offering advice along with recipes, listening when someone needed to vent, encouraging them when they felt like giving up. And at home, she poured that same love into her own family. Kareem was the kind of man people gravitated toward. A former high school football coach, he had spent years mentoring young men, pushing them to be better, not just on the field, but in life. Even after stepping away from coaching, he remained deeply involved in the community, organizing food drives, fundraising for kids in need, and always making time to help someone who was struggling. People trusted him. They admired his discipline, his dedication to his family, his seemingly unshakable integrity. He was a man who led by example, and those who knew him swore there wasn't a more stand-up guy in the world. Together, Jamilah and Kareem were a picture of black excellence. A power couple, not because they were wealthy or famous, but because they had built something real. A strong marriage. A beautiful home. A 12-year-old son, a bright, well-mannered boy who excelled in school and sports. He was smart and full of potential. Nasir was the center of their world. They raised him with love and structure, teaching him the values of hard work and respect, making sure he understood the importance of giving back. To the outside world, their life was the definition of perfect. Neighbors spoke about them with admiration, how they always seemed to be laughing, how their love for each other was evident in every interaction. On social media, Jamilah captured snapshots of their joy, Sunday dinners at the table, Kareem and Nasir playing basketball in the driveway, date nights filled with candlelit dinners and slow dances in the living room. People followed her posts religiously, liking and commenting about how beautiful her family was, how inspiring their love seemed. But perfection is a fragile thing. And in the Wesson household, behind the carefully curated images and the public smiles, there were cracks forming. Cracks no one could see. Not yet. Jamilah always believed that if something felt off, it probably was. The body had a way of sensing deception before the mind could rationalize it away. At first, she ignored it, the way Kareem's phone would vibrate late at night, how he started turning it face down at the dinner table. The sudden work emergencies, the unexplained absences, the way he'd come home smelling freshly showered, as if he had washed away something more than just sweat. She told herself she was imagining things. That stress was making her paranoid. That their marriage was solid, unshakable. But the signs kept piling up, stacking like bricks on her chest. The way he hesitated before saying, "I love you." The way his touch had changed, more out of habit than desire. He used to kiss her like he meant it, like she was the only woman in the world. Now, his lips barely lingered. She wasn't stupid. She knew something was wrong. But she wasn't the type to act without proof. So she waited, watching, collecting every inconsistency, every moment that didn't add up. She had no idea that the betrayal was worse than she could have ever imagined. Because the woman stealing kisses from her husband, slipping between her sheets, whispering the same lies into his ear, was the one person she had trusted the most, Tiana. Her best friend. Tiana had been a part of Jamilah's life for years. More than just a friend, she was family. The kind of woman Jamilah trusted with everything. They laughed together, cried together, shared secrets, and leaned on each other through life's ups and downs. If there was anyone Jamilah would have sworn was loyal to her, it was Tiana. But trust is a dangerous thing. Because while Jamilah was pouring her heart into her marriage, her best friend was betraying her in the worst way imaginable. It had started a year ago. A single moment of weakness, or at least that's what they told themselves. Tiana had come by the house one Saturday afternoon while Jamilah was hosting a weekend workshop. She had only meant to pick up a dish Jamilah had made for her mother, a quick favor, in and out. But Kareem had been home alone. They had stood in the doorway, making small talk, their laughter lingering just a little too long. Maybe it was the wine she had sipped before coming over. Maybe it was the way Kareem's eyes roamed over her body, the way he smirked when she joked about Jamilah always being too busy for anything but work. Or maybe it had always been there, bubbling under the surface, waiting for the right moment to boil over. One touch turned into two. A lingering glance became a knowing silence. And then, before either of them could stop it, they were tangled in Jamilah's bed, the ultimate betrayal, happening beneath the roof Jamilah had built with love and trust. It should have ended that day. They both knew it was wrong. Knew that if Jamilah ever found out, it would destroy her. But the pull between them was too strong, the secrecy too intoxicating. What should have been a mistake buried in regret turned into something else. Something dangerous. They met in hotels, in Tiana's car, in places they had no business being together. They found excuses, moments stolen in the shadows. Kareem told himself that Jamilah had changed, that she was too consumed with her career, too distant. That he deserved more. And Tiana, despite the gnawing guilt, convinced herself that one day he would leave Jamilah for her. But no affair stays hidden forever. Jamilah started noticing. The shift in Kareem's mood, the way Tiana started pulling back, canceling plans, avoiding eye contact. The perfume on Kareem's shirt that wasn't hers. The hushed phone calls, the tension in his jaw whenever she asked him where he had been. She could have confronted him. Could have demanded the truth. But she didn't need to hear the lies he would tell. Instead, she watched, quietly taking in every clue, every mistake they thought they had hidden well. And when the moment finally came, when the truth lay bare before her, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply smiled. Because while they had spent a year betraying her, she had spent that same time planning the perfect revenge. Jamilah was known for her Thanksgiving dinners. Every year, she went all out, cooking enough food to feed an army. The house smelled like tradition, smoked turkey slow roasting in the oven, cornbread dressing perfectly golden, collard greens simmering with ham hocks, filling the air with warmth and nostalgia. Jamilah had outdone herself, as she always did. But this year, the meal had a special touch. A new dish, something different. Something unforgettable. The guest list had been carefully curated. Family, Close friends, all the people who had watched Jamilah and Kareem's love story unfold over the years. The ones who called them the perfect couple, who marveled at their bond. And, of course, Tiana. She had no choice but to come. Jamilah had made sure of it, playing the same role she always had, the devoted best friend. Tiana, who had spent months avoiding Jamilah's gaze, was suddenly pulled back in, trapped in the web of hospitality and sisterhood. Kareem had woken up that morning feeling lighter than he had in months. The weight of the affair, the guilt pressing down on him, had started to loosen. Because soon, it would be over. He had already made the decision. He would leave Jamilah after the holidays. There was no need to cause a scene before then, no reason to ruin Thanksgiving. But once the new year came, he would finally be free. Free to be with Tiana, free from the lie of his marriage. He had texted her hours before dinner, a simple message that changed everything. I can't keep doing this. After the holidays, I'm leaving her. For real this time. He never made it to Thanksgiving dinner. By the time the guests arrived, Kareem was gone. Not missing, not out running an errand, just gone. His seat at the head of the table remained empty, his presence replaced by whispers and uneasy glances. Jamilah played the role of the gracious host, her smile unwavering, her voice steady as she welcomed everyone, setting plates in front of them with practiced ease. She had spent all day in the kitchen, crafting a meal they would never forget. The smoked turkey, juicy and tender. The cornbread dressing, rich with butter and sage. The collard greens, slow-cooked to perfection. And the new dish, the one that had everyone talking, the smoky barbecue meat. Soft, flavorful, with a richness that lingered on the tongue. The compliments poured in. Guests raved about the tenderness, the unique taste. They asked for the recipe, begged to know what kind of meat it was, what secret spices she had used. Jamilah just smiled, pouring another glass of wine, her eyes flickering toward Tiana. The house was alive with warmth and laughter, the rich aroma of smoked turkey and sweet cornbread filling every corner. Jamilah moved through the crowd effortlessly, her smile bright, her laughter easy. She hugged her in-laws, refilled wine glasses, and made sure every plate was full. Kareem just stepped out for a moment, she told them when they asked. He'll be back soon. No one questioned it. Not his mother, who chuckled and said, that man is always running late. Not his brothers, who were too busy debating football scores. Not even Nasir, who was too caught up in his food to care. Jamilah had outdone herself this year. The turkey was tender, the greens perfectly seasoned, the sweet potato pie just the right balance of creamy and spiced. But the real star of the night was the barbecue dish. Damn, this is good, someone murmured, taking another bite. Nasir nodded in agreement, licking sauce from his fingers. What is this, Ma? Jamilah smiled at him, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. Something special. Tiana sat at the far end of the table, barely touching her plate. She told herself she was imagining things. That Kareem was fine. That she was just paranoid because he still hadn't answered her texts. Where are you? She had sent it an hour ago. Nothing. Her fingers tightened around her phone. She sent another. You good? Still nothing. She tried to focus on the conversation around her, but the words faded into background noise. Her stomach twisted. She checked the time. Checked her phone again. Jamilah's voice pulled her back. You okay, girl? Tiana forced a smile. Yeah, just a little tired. Jamilah tilted her head, studying her for a moment before nodding. You should eat. You barely touched your plate. Tiana picked up her fork, but the food felt heavy in her mouth. She pushed the barbecue to the side of her plate, her appetite gone. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Tiana's stomach was in knots, her unease growing with each passing minute. The house was still filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation. But she couldn't focus. Kareem's silence was deafening. She needed air. Needed space. Slipping away from the dining room, she made her way to the kitchen, hoping to clear her head. Maybe she'd fix herself a plate, force down a few bites, try to shake this irrational fear clawing at her chest. The kitchen was dimly lit, quiet except for the faint bubbling of something on the stove. She inhaled deeply, the scent of smoky barbecue still lingered in the air, but there was something else beneath it. Something thick and metallic. She stepped toward the counter, reaching for a plate, when something on the cutting board caught her eye. A small, off-white object. At first, she thought it was a fragment of bone, maybe a piece of cartilage from the meat. But when she looked closer, her breath caught in her throat. A human tooth. Her hands trembled as she took a step back. She turned to the stove, her heart pounding against her ribs. The lid on the pot shifted slightly as steam curled into the air. Slowly, she reached out and lifted it. Chunks of meat floated in a thick, reddish broth. It should have looked normal. It should have been just another dish. But her mind refused to accept what she was seeing. The pieces were too large. The shape too familiar. Her vision blurred. Her pulse roared in her ears. And then she saw it, the trash can, the lid slightly ajar. Something inside glinted under the dim kitchen light. A ring. She didn't want to touch it. Didn't want to know. But her body moved on its own, her fingers shaky as she pulled it from the garbage. A wedding band. Her stomach twisted. There was blood smeared on the inside. And engraved on the surface, Kareem and Jamilah. Forever. Her throat tightened. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. She stumbled backward, her legs unsteady. The fridge. Some part of her knew she shouldn't open it. That whatever she found would shatter her forever. But she couldn't stop herself. With a trembling hand, she gripped the handle and pulled. And then she saw him. Kareem's severed head sat on the shelf, eyes wide, mouth frozen in a scream. His skin was pale, his lips tinged with blue. Blood pooled at the bottom, congealing into a thick, dark stain. A strangled sob caught in her throat. Before she could turn, before she could even think of running, an arm wrapped around her neck, yanking her back against a warm body. Hot breath brushed her ear. Jamilah's voice was soft, almost gentle. "Now, you're next on the menu." Tiana's breaths came in short, sharp gasps as she struggled against the pounding in her skull. She could still hear them, Jamilah's calm voice, the eerie stillness in Nasir's silence. "You always thought you knew everything, didn't you, Tiana?" Jamilah murmured, crouching beside her. "But you never knew this." Tiana's body trembled as she forced herself to look at Nasir, his hand still gripping the bat. His small frame was rigid, his face unreadable. But his eyes, those deep brown eyes, held something that made her stomach lurch. No fear. No remorse. Jamilah exhaled slowly, shaking her head. "You have no idea how much he saw. How much he endured. Kareem treated me like I was nothing, but he never thought twice about doing the same to Nasir. And my baby, my sweet boy, he took it all in." She let out a dry chuckle. Until he couldn't anymore. Tiana's mind raced, trying to piece together what Jamilah was saying. That night, Jamilah continued, her voice almost nostalgic, "Kareem came home angry. He was always angry. I knew what was coming. Nasir knew too. But this time, her eyes darkened. This time, before Kareem could lay a hand on me, Nasir did what I never had the courage to do." Tiana's throat tightened. "The first hit was hesitation," Jamilah said, her gaze shifting to her son. "But after that, he didn't hold back." Nasir blinked, his fingers tightening around the bat. Jamilah reached out, brushing a hand over his curls. "I didn't stop him. Her voice was matter-of-fact. I let him do what had to be done. Tiana felt her pulse hammering against her ribs. The air in the kitchen felt too thick, suffocating. When it was over, Jamilah went on, I looked at my son, covered in his father's blood, and I knew I had one job, to protect him. The police would never understand. They'd see a murderer. A violent child. But I saw my baby boy finally free. Tiana squeezed her eyes shut, bile rising in her throat. So I cleaned up the mess, Jamilah whispered. I made sure Karim would never leave us again. The realization hit Tiana like a freight train. The meat. The barbecue. Oh, God, she choked out. Tiana ran like hell, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she tore through the darkness. Every muscle in her body screamed, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she had seen what she had seen. Not when she knew what they had done. Her shaking fingers fumbled with her phone, nearly dropping it as she dialed 911. The moment the call connected, her voice broke into desperate sobs. She killed him. Oh my God, she fed him to us. Please send someone. The words barely made sense, but the dispatcher didn't ask her to repeat them. The horror in her voice was enough. The next morning, the police arrived at the Wesson home. The house was quiet, eerily so, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Inside, Jamilah sat at the dinner table, a half-empty wine glass in one hand. She turned toward the officers as they entered, raising the glass slightly in greeting. Well, she said, lips curling into a slow smile, you're just in time for leftovers. The kitchen was pristine, almost disturbingly organized. The counters wiped clean, the floor freshly mopped. The only thing out of place was the row of Tupperware containers lined up on the counter, each one carefully labeled for later consumption. One officer hesitated before lifting a lid. His face turned ashen. Karim. Every piece of him, meticulously butchered and packed away. In the living room, Nasir sat motionless on the couch, dried blood caking his small hands. The television flickered in the dim light, cartoons playing as if nothing had happened. Where's your father, son? One officer asked gently. Nasir didn't blink, didn't look away from the screen. He simply raised a finger and pointed at the dinner table, where plates still sat, smeared with barbecue sauce. He's right here. The officer swallowed hard. Jamilah chuckled softly, shaking her head. Guess Thanksgiving really was all about family this year. Then, with deliberate ease, she picked up a piece of meat, popped it into her mouth, and chewed. The trial became a spectacle, the kind of case that made headlines for weeks. Reporters swarmed the courthouse, cameras flashing as Jamilah, now clad in an orange jumpsuit, was led inside. She remained stone-faced, unbothered by the whispers, the gasps, the sheer disbelief in the air. The prosecution called her a monster, a woman so twisted by years of rage that she had done the unthinkable. They painted Nasir as a tragic figure, a boy forced into violence, a child broken by the horrors of his home. The defense fought back, arguing that Jamilah had been pushed to her limit, that years of emotional and physical abuse had led her to snap. And Nasir. He was tried separately. His small frame looked even smaller in the courtroom, his face blank as psychologists debated his fate. They said he had acted out of trauma. That he had been desperate. But no matter how they spun it, the fact remained, he had killed his father. The courtroom fell silent when Tiana took the stand. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edges of the witness box, her voice barely above a whisper as she recounted the nightmare she had walked into. The human tooth on the cutting board. The bloodied wedding ring in the trash. Karim's severed head, eyes still open, staring back at her from inside the fridge. One juror gagged. Another turned pale, hands clenched so tightly they shook. The deliberation took less than 2 hours. Jamilah was found guilty on all charges: first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, conspiracy to commit murder. The judge didn't hesitate. Life in prison. No parole. Nasir's sentence was different. He was just a child. He would remain in juvenile detention until he turned 21. After that, his fate would be reconsidered. As the guards moved to take Jamilah away, she finally turned, locking eyes with her son. For the first time, Nasir looked back. His face was unreadable. No tears. No anger. Just silence. Maybe one day he would understand. Maybe he would hate her forever. Either way, Thanksgiving would never be the same. This case is a chilling reminder of how betrayal, revenge, and long-held resentment can lead to unthinkable violence. What should have been a family celebration became something so horrific that even seasoned detectives struggled to comprehend it. The dinner table, once a place of togetherness, became the scene of a grotesque act of vengeance, one that will haunt those involved forever. Could this tragedy have been avoided? If Jamilah had confronted Kareem earlier, would she have chosen a different path? Or had the years of anger already made her decision for her? And then there's Nasir, just a boy, yet covered in his father's blood. Was he a victim, caught in the crossfire of his mother's hatred? Or did she shape him into something even darker? These are the questions that linger long after the trial is over, long after the headlines fade. But one thing remains certain: this story, like so many others, is proof that love, lies, and betrayal can push people to the edge, and beyond. If this story shocked you, like and subscribe for more cases that reveal just how dark the human heart can be.